Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, president and founder of AgileDad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. In continuation of our Agile Expert series, I have someone who I've recently come in contact with, but I still consider a very dear friend. We've had lots of great conversations. Dave West, CEO of Scrum.org. Dave, how are you today?
I'm greatly. Thank you for inviting me to this fabulous little podcast.
Oh, no worries. It's lots of fun. And you know, I hope you have the same experience as many of our past people have had, the experts that have been on. We really just try to have a good time. And today is no exception because it's a very special day. Do you want to elaborate? What are we celebrating today?
We're celebrating the 26th birthday of Scrum. So in 95
Mm-hmm.
in Uppsala, Ken presented the original Scrum paper, all 30-something pages of it. And it was Rebecca Westbrook invited him to present it. I believe that Jeff was on the committee as well, so he couldn't present it. And this is it's sort of like the first time that people had written it down and talked about it in this sort of setting. So I guess it's the birthday of Scrum today.
That is just super cool. I remember a lot of dates, but I have to be honest. When you first told me that today was the anniversary, I didn't remember the date. I remembered it was 95, but I didn't remember the date. So some interesting things you brought up right out of the gate, that Jeff was part of the board, that Ken had to present the document. And I understand that this was in relation to the Takuchi Nanaka document. And so you want to elaborate a little more and tell us a little bit about the early days of Scrum and what it was like.
So obviously, I'm following the mantra, there's no such thing as the truth, everybody's got their own perception of it. And my perception of the early days of Scrum, remember, I was working with Rupp then, so I was kind of like the evil enemy of Scrum. So I wasn't actually involved. In fact, I think he took another 2 more years and he told me I was an idiot. I think it was somewhere, a little bit later than that he told me I was an idiot. Anyway, so this is my perception of from talking to Ken and talking to Jeff about this. So Jeff and Ken knew each other, I actually think, from church. They'd sort of met each other numerous times. In fact, Jeff tried to set Ken up with his sister, which is another crazy story, which I won't elaborate on. Anyway, so they had known each other for a while, and Ken was a really fabulous engineer. He was really good at object-oriented software development. He had a tool that he'd been developing at ADM, and he was doing some really interesting things after his time at Wang and some other big companies. And Jeff was this sort of like CTO, like creative, entrepreneurial technology leader, really. And that's how they Ken describes Jeff. And Jeff said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity. I need some help. Can you come in and do some engineering?" And then they started working. Obviously, Patient Keep is a very famous example of it. They started working together. And these practices, Jeff brought his experience from Lean and from the work he'd been doing at Harvard and Harvard Business School and the like. And then Ken brought his brother was a chemist working in chemistry process.
Oh, wow.
And so these two worlds sort of collided, and Ken definitely brought empiricism and that sort of empirical process sort of doctrine, the sort of continuous understanding and learning. And Jeff brought this maniacal focus on process improvement, on those things. And the intersection was transparency, inspection, adaptation through transparency, this self-managed team stuff, which definitely came from more of the lean space. And the result, then Ken wrote in this document that was presented 26 years ago today.
That's just fantastic. And I mean, when you think, okay, so Scrum's been around for 26 years. And I think a lot of people still in this day and age, as a certified Scrum trainer and, hopefully soon to be a professional Scrum trainer, we'll see what happens. But it's one of these things where what I'm seeing when I'm talking to individuals, especially still in enterprises, which is interesting to me, is that for whatever reason, they're still saying, we're going to try this new Scrum thing. We're going to try this new Agile thing. And they don't realize that it's already been 26 years in the making. So I guess my question for you is this. Over this course of 26 years since Uppsala, I've seen, how shall I put this? I've seen a lot of opportunity where people have tried to mature what was already there in a way that detracted from, what they should have been doing. And I can tell you now, one of my biggest positions with regard to scrum.org is I'm a huge fan of everything being in line, that everything is just kind of laid out in such a way that it's easy to absorb, it's easy to comprehend, the materials are similar, et cetera. I guess what I'm trying to say is since Oopla up until now, what kind of things have you seen that I know there's been some inspect and adapt moments, but have you seen any significant moments? If I had to identify like a milestone moment or something that happened since then, have you seen any of those type of moments happen as
Uh,
far as maturity?
Yeah, in terms of the Scrum guide and in terms of Scrum, obviously the original paper was long. It talked about phases. It
Hmm.
actually, dare I say, borrowed some ideas from the work of Grady Booch and Jim Rumber and Eva Jakobsen and the work they were doing at that time. Ken definitely focused completely on software development, and it
Right,
was all about software product development, really. The product owner was the agile product manager. There was, some things that were definitely different then. But the core concept of this, I mean, Scrum's really simple. It's empiricism, self-managed, self-organized, empowered teams, and it's continuous improvement,
right,
surrounded by values, focus on outcomes. This discipline of definition of done and the increment and the like. And then, obviously, to be successful, you have to build a community around it to make it work. But at the heart, those ideas were there. How they were described was quite different.
right,
During the 26 years, though, we have seen some significant changes. I think, obviously there's some terminology changed, as the world has changed around terminology, such as, daily stand-up. The emphasis now is daily scrum for many reasons. In rugby, a scrum is formed when the ball stops moving. And
right.
that was kind of the idea of Scrum in that original paper, the new product game, right? But what's interesting is by calling it a daily scrum, you remind yourselves that you're going to be moving for the next day. You're sort of like everybody comes together and pushes and the ball, etc. And also some people can't stand, so that obviously is emphasized in that. So there's been
Sure.
some terminology changes, really as the world has looked at things slightly differently. But the real interesting changes, I think, the last release was some significant ones, and then probably the two releases before that when values are added. The
Right,
values, Scrum was sort of agnostic of psychological safety, the environment for you to be successful, and that was fair play. That wasn't something we talked a lot about, but now I think it's increasingly apparent when the five values are added that psychological safety, focus, what courage, commitment, all of those things are so important for Scrum success. So I think that was a major sort of like change. And I think recently, November, the last release, and I think, Ken and Jeff did an amazing job because they really flipped it. One, they totally removed any reference to software development because
right,
I don't know about you, Lee, but most of the not most, many of the people that we're teaching today at scrum.org, our PSTs are teaching, they are not in direct software. They're obviously
right,
influenced by it. I mean, they're working at a large petrochemical company, and yes, data is a key part of their thing. They're in marketing, they're in legal, they're in
right.
product development. They work for SpaceX or they work for Tesla or they work, so that, but it's not just about software. So that was a major change. The other thing that was huge was this maniacal focus on delivering value. So product goal was added.
Hmm.
An additional sort of like stage of sprint planning was added that talks about value. The development team was removed to make everybody accountable for that increment of value as you incrementally move towards the product
Right.
goal or realize the product goal is incorrect. I think value and outcomes and customer have been a significant change in the last release. And I think they're the ones that are certainly fresh in my mind. But it's good to see that it's evolved without change, without losing its sort of roots.
I was just going to go there. Yeah, it's evolution without a revolution is the way I like to
Yeah.
call it. Right? It's there's no revolt. There's nothing to complain about. There's not been any kind of just big overarching foundation changes. And this is something that's very interesting because you mentioned that a lot of the companies that you're working with now, their focus isn't necessarily on software development. I'm in that same boat, very same boat. In
Yeah.
fact, the majority of the companies that I personally am working with are from the entertainment industry. So the entertainment industry has taken a lot of these different principles and practices and applied it to what they do, which is really, really cool. But with that being said, the changes that you mentioned, I attributed one of those changes back to 1977 when Star Wars was created, because we all know that that's when the 5 values of Scrum were invented, right? Or at least that's my take on it. It's Star Wars. It's use the Force, right? Use the Force. It's focus, openness, respect, commitment, and extreme courage, because I had to throw the E in because fork didn't make sense. But no, but seriously, it's just a lot of these things that are happening have really evolved Scrum in such a way that it is able to be adaptive as it should be to many different types of organizations, regardless of what you're doing. And the value of simplicity really comes into play here. The art of deciding what not to do, the art of aligning your work correctly. And it was one of the principles behind the Scrum values to begin with, right? Number 10, if I believe correctly. But but it was just one of these things where it started to align there. But then there needed to be something from Ken and Jeff to really pull this together. And the Scrum Guide has done a fantastic job. So go ahead.
I just want to, can I just riff on that a little bit, Lee,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think it's super, super important. So as I mentioned earlier, I was the Rash Unified Process product manager, right? And I used to go around, the world talking to people about process, and they asked me 2 things. One, why doesn't the RUP cover, real time, mainframe, embedded, whatever? And can you add it? And then secondly, how do you make it simpler? I was like, well, hang on a minute. You can't keep adding things and then expecting it to be simpler. What I think Ken and Jeff have done, and there's a really healthy tension between them in this, and I've been fortunate for the last 6 years to have been in many of these meetings. I think, somebody's got to make the notes, I guess, or something. I wouldn't say I intellectually contributed, but I definitely got the coffee.
Facilitator, Dave. Facilitator.
Let's call it facilitation. Though facilitating those 2 isn't really, it's more, I don't lion taming, I don't know. But anyway, these 2 amazing people. And anyway, what I've realized is they've done a fantastic job of keeping it simple. In fact, this release of the Scrum Guide, Ken, along with Jeff, ripped massive sections out, a paragraph here, a sentence there, because it was never long anyway. And that has really focused. They asked, well, does that add value? We said it twice because there was duplication in the guide. So keeping it as simple as possible, I think, is incredibly hard, because there's a lot of things that I would love to add to it. Things around lean startup, things around design thinking, things around some practices around architecture, around metaphor, around there's all sorts of really interesting things that you could easily extend it to. Like the product owner, everybody's like, well, that isn't enough. That's not enough information from an agile product manager. No, it isn't. You've got to add more stuff. And Scrum Master, it's very light on the actual skills that you need to do those 3 services. Serve the team, serve the product owner, serve the organization. It's light on those, but it's light for a reason, because definition of ready is a great example. When 6 years ago, one of the first things that I said to Ken, actually, Jeff wasn't there, I said, I think we should add definition of ready. And Ken's like, well, that's really interesting. So what's Scrum used for? I was like, well, dealing with complex work, when you don't really know everything, you focus on a goal and you break it. I was like, yeah. So complex work, valuable work. Oh, yes. Valuable outcomes are what we are trying to achieve. So sometimes you may not necessarily have a good description of the thing that you're trying to do, but you have to do some work in the next 2 weeks or week on it, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't be ready, would it? So one thing, he goes, definition of ready is really handy for making sure that you only work on things that you understand. So it can increase velocity and productivity massively, but it can also take away from value. Now, people can make the right choice if they're intelligent, or provided with the right information, whether it's necessary to have a definition of ready at this stage of the evolution of the product, or whether actually we should concentrate on the things that are the most important, refine those into a sprint, and actually do some work on it. And, things like that, where you're like, wow, that's deep, man. I hadn't thought of that. I'd have just added it and then argued about how you do it in those situations and added a lot of complexity that really you just don't need. So I think, over those 26 years, we have learned so much about the use of Scrum, as you rightly said, in many different contexts and many things. And by not putting it in the guide, I think it's a hugely positive thing. But it means that people have to think, and there is sometimes a characteristic in the human race where we want to be told what to
That's
do, and we
right.
don't want to think, which is always a tension with Scrum, right?
You're absolutely right, Dave. In fact, I was on a call with a client yesterday, and the first thing she said, she says, we have the Scrum guide, and she goes, and we really love it. She goes, it has a lot of great information. She says, thank you for sending that over to us. Like they'd never seen it before. I was like, okay, and she's, I was shocked, and she says, she says, well, we're going to use this as a basis to reformat our playbook. I said, your playbook? She says, yeah. She says, we have a 412 page playbook that tells us exactly how we're going to execute Scrum. And we're going to use this Scrum guide now to check off and validate to make sure everything in our playbook. And I was just like, this can't be, Dave. This can't be. I was thinking about you today, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I said, I said, I have to look at this differently though. So I calmed myself down and I looked at it as opportunity, Dave. And my question for her was, why do we need the playbook? What exactly are we trying? And it was along the lines of, if everything were planned out, a playbook would make perfect sense. But when the second uncertainty creeps in, the playbook goes out of the window, and you need to know how to handle complex problems. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Scrum.
It really is, and remember that the context of the 26 years ago, and we're still in this world, by the way, the
Right.
industrial mindset, the mass production manufacturing age is still the predominant way in which organizations are organized, how they think about risk,
Mm-hmm.
how they manage budgets, how they align incentives.
Yep.
All of those things pull against Scrum, and it took people like Ken and Jeff, who did it very differently, by the way, but Ken and Jeff to come in and really disrupt that. But it's still there. Now, I hope we don't follow the mantra of science. They say that science only advances one funeral at a time, but
Right.
or one retirement in a time would be a much nicer way to put that, right? But I believe now, and I think COVID and the pandemic is the pivot point. I
do
think
too.
all enterprises are now digital first. They're all dealing with rapid changing cycles. They're all thinking about investment and planning horizons that are much shorter than they've traditionally done.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the opportunity, and it only took 26 years, so I'm pretty confident, happy about that. This is the opportunity to double down on those impediments. That playbook is illustrative of a misunderstanding or a misalignment between
Right.
the organizational environment and the team delivery creator, whatever that thing is that Scrum servers. So how can we bring those worlds together? And I think we have to do it incrementally. I think we have to use Scrum on Scrum. Ooh, crazy idea. And I think we need to think about outcomes always.
Yes.
It's not about Scrum. It's about delivering amazing, valuable products to customers as frequently as they need them in an environment that is supportive of a team and a great, happy place to work, right? And that's what we need to concentrate on. If we can do that, then we'll be all groovy, Lee.
I think you're right. And I want to ask you one last question, because I've been curious about this since I first met you. So the final question for me is, if you had, and I call this, and I ask everyone this question, so it's not just you. If I gave you what I call the thrift store genie lamp, so let me explain. It's a genie lamp that you can rub and get wishes, except for there's only one wish left. So it's the dollar store genie lamp, right? There's only one wish left. You can only get one, not three. If you could make one impactful change to help people better understand, using Scrum or using Agile in general, even, to make the world a better place, if you had that one wish without any negative retribution whatsoever, and you could rub the lamp and just make one thing better, pull one lever, push one button, flip one switch, what would you do to help people better engage? Or what would you do to help, what would you change to make it better than what it is now? Or would you change anything?
I'm not sure I would change anything with Scrum, because I'm not
Right.
smart enough to be able to do that. What I would change, though, is the alignment of teams to the business outcomes. I think the biggest thing that undermines Scrum adoption is the fact that they're using Scrum to do work not to deliver value.
Right.
And what I would love to see, and you see it in these huge bureaucratic, complex organizations,
Mhm.
you get a team that's awesome, that's got so much passion and energy to doing fabulous work, and the product owner really is just a project manager that's just managing the work from all these different places to the team, and the team feels disconnected from the work, and the work is, they try to make it interesting, they try to ask questions of it, they're continuously beat down around it. I believe in the potential of human beings, Lee, and I believe that tools like Scrum untap that. Untap, if that's a word. They basic tap into it. That's the word I'm looking for, phrase I'm looking for. They tap into that potential. But what gets in the way is when, don't worry about the context, just do that work, build that screen, do that marketing campaign, write that thing. You're being called on by all these silly things. And what I'd love to see, if I had that genie, I would say, let's get all teams to be aligned to business outcomes better, and get that clarity, that sight of customer, and let's make that happen. Because if we do, then literally, and we saw this in the pandemic, we saw it over and over again, that when we got teams, because they couldn't afford for all they didn't know what they were doing. So suddenly executives started working directly with teams or teams of teams. And suddenly they said, this is the customer, this is the outcomes we need. This is the challenges we've got around supply chain or around whatever. Let's work on them, and let's do the first thing. When that happened, amazing things happen. And I hope we don't go back to status quo. I hope we take that moment of clarity and really think about our organizations and say, come on, it's not that hard. Let's align to outcomes and customers.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And I couldn't have asked for a better answer. That's incredible, because I sense the same thing. And many times I've caught myself saying this. And I think it all stemmed from one incident. And this will be a good food for thought closing point for anyone who's listening. So I had an engagement that I was on, and it was for a large electronics company. And I was just there to survey the landscape, to see what was going on, to see where I might be able to offer opportunity to help. And I was on the elevator, of all places. I was on the elevator, walking from the parking lot, going in the elevator, and a young lady came in, and I'll never forget it. She was dressed really, really well dressed, and she was drenched. She had no umbrella. It was storming down rain outside, and she was just really, sopping wet. I took off my jacket and I gave it to her, and I never got that jacket back. Anyway, squirrel moment. But I gave her that jacket, and I said, "What floor?" And she said 8. I said, "Oh, I'm going to 8 too." I said, "I don't think I've ever met you." She said, "I'm Susie." I said, "Pleasure to meet you, Susie. I'm Lee." I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I'm just a developer." I said, "What just a product do you work on?" And she told me what product she worked on, and she's like, "Well, who are you?" I'm like, well, I said, "Why do you work on that product?" was my question. And she says, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Lee, you're Susie. We already did that slow elevator." I said, "So why do you work on that product?" And she said, "Because that's what I get paid to do."
Oh.
And Dave, for me to say my heart broke is probably understatement of the century. And I'm challenging everyone who's listening today to ask yourself, to take Dave's wisdom. What he just spouted for you was wisdom. Take that wisdom and ask yourself, and don't do this publicly, obviously, but ask yourself, am I surrounded by people who are just here because this is what they get paid to do? As good as your Scrum implementation might be, if people don't understand that connection that Dave was just now discussing, it's for naught. It's for nothing. You need to truly have that connection, and the teams need to have a direct connection to the value they're providing, and they need to understand who their target customer is, what problem they're trying to solve, what value they're bringing to the organization or to the people. And I think that without that, you end up with a team of people who are very good at doing work, but they're not fulfilling any value or any goal. And I couldn't have asked for, like I said, any better answer than that, because it is one of the biggest keys. I call it the bridge that's missing, right? It's, you get to one side of the chasm and there's just no bridge there to get to the other side. And I feel like organizations, instead of trying to build a bridge, they figure out a way to build a wall so that they can go around to the other side so no one falls in the chasm. But all along, it would have been a better option just to build that bridge. And people just don't want to take the time and energy to do it.
Exactly.
So Dave, it has been nothing less than a pleasure. Last thing, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, I know that you are very busy with things Scrum.org related, but if they want to learn more about Scrum.org and they want to learn more about classes and whatnot, I believe in building bridges. So I'm building a bridge between the CST community, and the PST community this way. How can people learn more about scrum.org, about your mission, about what's going on? Where do they need to go?
Oh, well, obviously www.scrum.org, nice and simple, right? Can't forget
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Yep.
actually my email, dave.west@scrum.org. Feel free to reach out to me. Can't promise you get an instant answer, but I love this stuff, as you may have noticed from the
Yeah.
passion. I love talking about it. I love learning about it. I definitely haven't got all the answers, but sometimes I can ask the right question and out of it comes something good. So yeah, reach out to me and David J. West on Twitter and the usual places. I'd love to hear from everybody.
You
Thanks
know
for your
what?
time, Lee.
No, thank you for your time. I was just about to say, I know your time is valuable, so I'm going to wrap this up. This concludes this episode, but if you have questions, concerns, anything you want to know about, reach out to Dave. He'd love to help you from the scrum.org perspective. And you can get the thing that I love the most about this is that now people have an opportunity to get two different perspectives from people who are influential in the Agile community. I don't want to say Agile experts, but influential in the Scrum community who can help guide you. Or if we don't know the answers, because heaven knows I don't know all the answers, we can definitely get you in touch with people who do. So if you have a topic you want to discuss, or if you have something you want to learn more about, feel free to reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com, where we'd love to put you in touch with the right people and get you connected. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care. We'll see you, Dave.
Bye-bye.